Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Combining Customer and Commercial Diligence to Ready M&A Deals for Greater Success. The webinar is presented to you in partnership with Strategex. You can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your GoToWebinar toolbar to ask questions. The questions will be monitored, and the presenters will answer as many as possible during or after today's presentation. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on acg.org's website along with the slides from today's presentation. Thank you again for joining us. Now, I'll turn it over to Anthony Barr and Kay Cruz, both Vice Presidents at Strategex.
Thanks, Kathy. My name's Anthony. I'm a VP Engagement Manager at Strategex, focusing primarily in our customer diligence practice.
And I'm Kay Cruz, also practicing at Strategex in the voice of the customer discipline along with customer due diligence. Just
quick introduction on who we are, what we do. We are a Chicago-based firm that specializes in customer experience and the voice of the customer methodology. Been around since '93, and since then we've done over 800 of these engagements. Industry agnostic, with a common thread being that everything we touch is almost exclusively B2B. We do diligence and non-diligence related work, and we have about a 60-40 split domestic versus ex-US work. The research that we conduct is all in-house. We have a team of about 20-25 researchers, 18 plus languages. This year we're probably on track to do almost 4,000 executive interviewers, just to give you a sense of the scale. What we want to talk about today is customer and commercial diligence, what they are, what they're used for, when to use them, and then also when do we know if we have a situation where we would benefit from combining them. Because oftentimes, especially in core upper mid-market where we know customer diligence, commercial diligence, are often referred to as market research, is a standard. We want to pose today the question if we think adding a customer component to that would add value and, parallel to the title of our presentation today, help increase the odds of successful deals. So we're going to go through just a foundational understanding of what these two types of diligence are. We're going to talk about some indicators on your transactions, on your deals that might suggest you would benefit from a joint approach. We're going to talk about some best practices. And also we have a case study for you today. And then plenty of time at the end for any Q&A. Before we get into it though, quick poll just to give us a sense of who's in the room today, what the level of understanding of these things are, help shape our conversation. Thinking back to your most recent B2B deal, if you were an acquirer, did you perform any of these? Or if you were an advisor or consultant, did you recommend any of these things? A, commercial diligence on your last deal. B, customer. C, both. Or D, neither. So I'll launch the poll and we'll let this run for a minute or two. And we'll be back with the results. All right, so 70% of precincts reporting. It looks like we have about half of everyone on the line saying they've done both, which is great. We're at 45% saying both, 25% saying commercial only, 12% saying customer only. Yeah, 1 minute. Yeah, so good. So it sounds like most people are familiar with this. So I think what we'll do up front is to kind of just touch on this. I don't want to go into this at a too rudimentary of a level since it does sound like people are familiar with it, but just to recap, get everyone level set. When we talk about commercial diligence, right, also known as market research, as I mentioned, this is typically something that starts before negotiations begin. Oftentimes, this is something that starts before you even really commit to getting into a category. You want to really understand what the landscape looks like. You want to understand who the players are. You want to understand the competitive dynamics. You want to understand the trends and where the category is going to see if it's a viable fit, to see if it's a category that warrants building out a platform. Right, so for that reason, commercial, I'm probably going to do that a lot. Commercial diligence, market research, really, really important if you think you might want to be building out a platform, because you need to get intimately familiar with that category. You need to become an expert in that space. The way commercial diligence is often done is through consultants who rely on a variety of open source databases, secondary research, expert panels that are out there, not necessarily primary research, but tapping into existing knowledge. Commercial diligence may include an analysis of a target's customer base. If you've gotten far enough along in the process where you actually have a couple targets identified, it may include that. But what we find is that this often tends to be more of a cursory approach to understanding the customer base. We're looking at things like contracts. We're looking at things like terms and agreements that might be in place. We're looking to see if there's customer concentration, right? Especially in B2B, we know that that 80-20 rule applies almost all the time. And we're looking at the length of these relationships. Are they pretty sticky? Are we confident that these customers are going to stay around? Very rarely do we actually go out and talk to customers. We deduce a lot of these things based on category knowledge or target level knowledge that's based on their own internal metrics and knowledge that they have. Totally suitable approach in many instances, a lot of benefits to doing this. By no means are we saying commercial diligence does not add value. By no means are we saying commercial diligence is not necessary, especially again, that core upper mid-market. But there are blind spots. McKinsey had published a case study recently, and what they found is that the greatest errors in estimation appear on the revenue side, which is unfortunate since revenue synergies form the basis of strategic rationales for many deals. Many of your investment theses are based on the idea that you can grow revenue, because we know that when we talk about value creation, right, the reason we're all in this is to create value. We know that revenue, top line growth, is the primary driver of value creation. But what they found is that almost 70% of the deals in their database failed to achieve those revenue synergies they were expecting, right? Ties into that notorious number we've all seen over and over, 70 to 90% of deals fail. A lot of that is because those deals failed to realize the revenue side of the equation. Customer diligence is one way to fill that void, so to fill in the missing knowledge, to give us the variables that we need to really validate our investment theses and give us the confidence to move forward with deals. The reason is because we are still securing all of that great category level knowledge through commercial diligence. We're just supplementing it with more specific knowledge that's geared towards the target itself. So instead of going out and understanding what the market thinks the competitive landscape looks like, we can actually go to customers of the target and ask them who the target competitors are. Instead of deducing, extrapolating what the trends and future growth outlook for the category might be, we can actually go straight to the customer, ask them what they see to be the trends, ask them what their future growth will be. So it's a much more specific set of feedback from a customer perspective. So shared objectives in many instances, right? We're still looking at customer concentration. We're still assessing the strength and stability of the customer base, just like we would with commercial, but the context changes, the audience changes. And the reason is because customer diligence is usually almost always done through primary research, right? We are actually going out, generating new knowledge, often via web surveys, in-depth interviews, and we're talking to decision makers at the company's top accounts. So these are people who actually are influencing or ultimately deciding which suppliers they go with. The same study from McKinsey that pointed out that 70% of deals don't recognize the revenue expectations that they have also recognizes that due diligence on the target's customers would have revealed that they were especially likely to defect, right? This is something that we see time and time again, and about 15 to 20% of the diligence engagements we work on, the deal either, the acquirer either walks away from the deal, or there's a substantial haircut on the valuation because customers bring up issues. Customers either explicitly tell us or intimate that they're at risk. Customers tell us that their future spend is going to decline. Customers tell us that new product service concepts that the target's working through are not relevant, right? A lot of things that can destabilize those pro formas. And with customer feedback, you can calibrate those to see if the investment thesis still makes sense. So we have these two things, right? And it's great that so many people are already doing these in conjunction with each other, because quite often we see that they're done in isolation. But we would suggest that the question isn't either or, right? We see a high value in both of these. We're proponents of A and B, right? Combining the benefits of commercial and customer diligence to tell a really powerful story that validates our thesis, gives us the confidence to move forward and ultimately increase the odds of a successful deal. Because I think it's something that we say a lot, but sometimes we don't always act on it. And, you know, customer is king. We always talk about it, especially in B2B, where you have concentration, where we are so dependent on a handful of customers sticking around with us post-close. We need to make sure that we're securing them, and we need to make sure they're going to increase their share, spread positive word of mouth, allow us to sustain premium prices, a whole lot of benefits of having a secure customer base, because they all are ultimately the critical driver of value. So how do we know when we have a situation where we may benefit from this joint approach? So to talk us through some indicators, I'm going to hand it off to Kay.
Thanks, Anthony. We're going to basically look at 10 specific markers that we say will basically help you have a more successful deal. These markers will be able to identify anything from customer concentration all the way through share of wallet growth opportunities, certainly competitive benchmarking along the way, looking at things going as far as, importantly, something that commercial often can't touch, which is how easy will it likely be to integrate the company into either the platform or into the organization itself, the organization being the acquiring organization, the mix of the cultural fit that the private equity group may be looking for relative to their overall portfolio. So we're going to look at these very specifically, and we're going to actually go through and talk about what are some of the questions and answers that you would be looking for. Specifically, what are you trying to find in each of these 10 markers that will be contributive to the commercial knowledge, but importantly will add additional value to your decision making on whether or not this is a good deal or not, or whether or not this deal has the potential for future success. What we find in most cases, certainly as the poll shows, that the majority of folks, the majority of private equity or strategic acquirers who do both commercial as well as customer diligence will find that they are really providing best in class. So the best in class will do both. Now, it may vary as far as which one has the heavier weight or the heavier value. If you have a platform that you're already fairly familiar with the industry, you might lighten up a bit on the commercial side and heavy up on the customer side so that you can understand where does that target company fit within the overall industry as a whole. So now let's look at some real specifics. What we've tried to do with this particular section is do what are the kinds of questions that you would ask, and importantly, what would be the things that we would call best practice along the way. So looking at, for instance, how do you mitigate the risk of customer concentration? One of the things that we've oftentimes heard is well, our top 5 customers actually represent anywhere from 60 to 70% of our revenue. Are they loyal? One of the things that we've oftentimes uncovered is we talked to the number 3 customer in an account. The account had told us, target account had told us that they were actually very, very, very comfortable and certainly loyal. And one of the first things that our researchers heard were there isn't anything I like about them, and they're not on any new bid sheets. That was new news certainly to the potential acquirer, and importantly, once we dug through deeper, we found out that it was also new news to the target company. So one of the things that we would do, obviously looking at which accounts are at risk, is there anything we can do to retain them post-close? Even in that dire circumstance, we did learn some situations that the target company could do along with the help of its private equity new ownership in order to retain that particular account post-close. How did we find out? They told us this is what they need to do. So along the way, did they expect to see their spend increase or stay the same or decrease? How do you really find that? You segment the customers by revenue. We want to talk to top down, from top down all the way down to the bottom, and we want to take a look at what we call the top 20% that are likely driving 60 to 80% of the revenue. We also can certainly look at those that we call underperforming accounts, those accounts that you look at and you say, wow, I know we should have more business from them, but we just don't. So we try to understand, well, why don't we? And again, that's something that typically an account will not say that to the target company. They are a little weary about sharing that kind of knowledge on why they may or may not want to increase their spend, certainly from that standpoint. So this certainly, first task is to mitigate customer concentration, that risk factor. Second element to look at would really be to take a look at, trying to make the computer wake up, validating the growth outlook, certainly for the category as well as the target itself. So what do we do? Certainly this is an add-on to commercial. Commercial can find this, certainly with secondary research, but importantly, oftentimes we'll find that the target company can really help us confirm those assumptions. They can help us look at what's going on relative to price value. Is it certainly going to be seen as certainly something that can move forward? What's the EBITDA really going to be after the fact? One of our accounts has said, you know, what our work does is provide the color and the context of both historic performance, financials, as well as give a projection into the future performance on the financials. So what we do is we basically set some baseline expectations. We validate it certainly at the target company itself. So we look at what the target company is saying they will do. And then we go into having enough customer interviews that we can say, yeah, check the box, they're pretty accurate. Or we may say, guess what? They actually have set the bar fairly low for what they think the value of the category growth will be. In essence, we've had enough of the customers that themselves tell us that they do expect it to increase even more so than what was projected. So that's obviously a happy place to be. Third thing that we want to look at is basically looking at the channel strategy. Does the target company's sales channels now align with how customers prefer to buy? You'd say, well, of course they would. Well, oftentimes we find that that's not the case. In many cases, we find that customers are wanting to be more self-serve. They want to use an e-commerce platform or an emerging channel that the target hasn't yet necessarily put on their priority list. For whatever reason, they're just saying, well, we're not sure that's such a good thing. Yet when we go in and talk to customers, they may say, hey, you know, I really need to understand how I can buy from this company on a more direct basis, because we're doing it basically now. I just want to find out, I want to get more information. I want to validate how I can, in essence, buy from them more efficiently and more effectively. So oftentimes we will look at and try to not only validate, but importantly calibrate the channel mix and the channel strategies that the target company has put in place. That's kind of our third thing. Fourth, win-loss ratios. Obviously looking at customer churn, what we really want to do is try to make sure that we're not churning customers. Talking to customers about why or when they might provide new work. Why or when, who is on, for instance, their short list for new projects? How do they evaluate customers? What's the criteria that they use that helps them make a decision one way or the other? And then importantly, how does the target perform against the criteria? We ask them specifically, do you have suggestions? Does this company lead or lag its competition? What are the triggers that we see for customer churn? How can they be prevented? If we're talking to lost customers, certainly one of the things that we can find out is what can they do to earn back the business? Is there anything they can do, again, to earn back the business if it's an important account? So we want to look at what we call the customer decision journey, and we want to take and basically chart that across the customer interviews to try to understand what's going on really from kind of a very holistic point of view in understanding that decision-making journey. Then importantly, when we look at the competitive position, I don't know how many times we've been asked by target companies well, how are you going to find out how I compare competitively? They won't really tell me too much about my competition. Well, that's because you're going at them directly. But as a third party, you'll oftentimes find that a third party will be able to really gain insight into the competitive position. Who else are you sourcing from? Maybe they'll supply an A, maybe they'll supply supplier X. But importantly, how do we as a company, meaning the target company, compare to competitive suppliers? Are we the go-to supplier? Certainly from our standpoint, we want to look at that landscape and supplement what's going on in the market. What are the forces at work that are impacting the decision on the top accounts, certainly moving forward.
All right. So those are the first 5. The second 5, we use a concept called the Net Promoter Score. Net Promoter Score is an industry standard metric that's out there to quantify how loyal customers are, right? It's something we've all seen before. How likely would you be to recommend company X to a colleague in the industry, right? But what we sometimes forget is that loyalty is predicated by satisfaction. So oftentimes what we're doing in these diligence engagements is to map the customer journey, identify all of those major touch points the customer has with the target, measure the level of satisfaction they have with each. So how satisfied are you with quality? How satisfied are you with lead time? How satisfied are we with price for the value, et cetera? Can capture scores on a couple dozen of these touch points. And then not just understand the satisfaction, but understand the opportunities for improvement. So if we get a really low score on lead times, why? What are their expectations? What are their anecdotes that they share about what went wrong? What are the suggestions for improvement? So it lets us gain loyalty and gain market share by first working on the fundamentals, the customer experience. We also use customer feedback to help build a pretty compelling innovation roadmap. There's a great case study that's actually on our website, I believe. This is one of Kay's projects, so I don't want to steal her thunder, but we had an acquirer who was looking at a target company, and they were looking at their financials, and they saw that they had a huge R&D budget, but a lot of their new product launches were failing. So the target was saying, all right, well, why are we dumping all this money into R&D when we're not getting a return on it? So let's ask customers if R&D is really something that's important to them. Because if the customers come back and say, no, I'm not looking to the company for innovation, I'm not looking to them for R&D, then we can cut this expense, right? Turns out customers were extremely interested in R&D, and they were definitely looking to the target for innovative solutions. The problem is the products that the target was pumping out were born in a lab, right? These were ideas that engineers thought were novel and added a lot of value, but the customers just didn't see a need for them. They didn't buy into the value proposition. So not only in the customer interviews did we say, yes, there actually is a need for innovation and they are looking to you for it. Along the way, we also generated, I think, was it 200 new product concepts. Customers on their own told us, across all the interviews we conducted, a total of 200 potential new product and service concepts that was used to then fill that innovation roadmap. So post-close, the acquirer actually ended up putting more money into R&D, but we just did it in a way that was more focused on serving customers' undermet needs, more focused on filling gaps in our product portfolio to make it more comparable to competitors. Developing a value creation playbook. This is something that, for the acquirers on the line, we know this is something that you're thinking of well in advance before you even really decided to go with under LOI, but oftentimes customer feedback can help us validate if the playbook we put together is going to work or if it needs to be adjusted. Questions we ask is, what can the target do to grow share of wallet? So we already have a customer base. What can we do to get more out of them? How can we better serve them? How can we improve their customer experience? How can we gain loyalty so we capture a greater share of their wallet? But from more of a marketing perspective, what else can we do to acquire new customers? What is that customer decision journey? What are the compelling messages they're looking for? What are the competitors are they evaluating? What can we do to give us an advantage when they're going through that decision-making process? From a value creation perspective, we also look at pricing. Oftentimes we say we're going to go in and we're going to raise prices, but we don't necessarily ask customers if we have permission to do so. And in raising prices, sometimes we lose customers because we go over that threshold of price value that they can justify. So through customer interviews, we have very subtle ways, nuanced ways of looking at price, looking at it from multiple perspectives, so we can make more of a conclusive statement as to whether or not there's an opportunity for price increases. And then what suggestions do those are very top line focused when we talk about value creation. On more the bottom line, what suggestions do customers have for how the target can operate more efficiently? Right? Can they pack products for me more efficiently? Can they incorporate technology? Can we communicate more efficiently? What are those things that can save both human and capital resources? This is an interesting one that we get increasingly more often, it sounds like. One of the objectives is, we have a target, the management team seems pretty solid. Do I really need to be an active manager? Do I really need to bring in an operating partner? Questions that we ask to address this objective is really understanding the level of engagement that customers have with the target. Do they feel like they're valued customers? Do they know who the senior management team is? Have they reached, more of a partner status rather than just a vendor status? And do customers express confidence in the team? A lot of times, especially with some of the deals we work on, an increase in these family businesses that are looking for exits, a lot of customers are sometimes concerned about succession plans. They're not always sure about the abilities of the pre-identified future leadership team. So it helps us get a sense as to whether or not we do need to bring someone in who can be that strong partner and make sure they're executing against the playbook. And then finally, this is a very important one that doesn't get as much attention as it should sometimes, but really understanding the cultural fits, not only between acquirer and target, but if you're doing a platform, the target and its ability to integrate. The way we start to understand this is we take it into more of a projective qualitative technique where we're trying to have customers characterize the target company, right? When you hear the target company, what's the first thing that comes to mind? What are their strengths? What are their areas for improvement? What's the persona, the essence of that company? If they're descriptors that are parallel with our own values, with the values of the platform, that's a good indicator. Do customers respect their primary contacts, right? The people with whom they do the most business, are these people that they trust and they enjoy doing business with and they consider them friends and they're easy to communicate with? Or do they question their integrity? Do they say they're non-communicative? Do they say they don't help me resolve problems? Right, getting more at the human element of these deals that I think sometimes goes ignored. Those are 10 objectives that, I would say probably the 10 most common objectives that we're asked to address in these engagements. But what I would say is that, every deal is a snowflake, right? Every transaction you're looking at has its own nuances and intricacies. Customer diligence, since we are conducting primary research, since we are creating something new, is extremely flexible, extremely scalable, allows us to really address any question, validate any component of the thesis that acquirers are struggling through. And then just closing on this part of the agenda today, I think it's really interesting. Quite often, I've heard this from a couple customers. We just chose this one quote. A lot of people have told us that it's the only type of diligence they do that adds value post-close. And the reason for that is because not only are we gathering a ton of feedback and insights from a risk mitigation, diligence perspective, but we're getting a ton of feedback that can really kickstart that value creation process. So the feedback and insights and recommendations that we're gathering can, in the very short term, help retain any accounts that are at risk. Lets us know exactly what we need to do, right? Customers are explicitly telling us what we have to do to gain a greater share of their wallet. They're telling us what we need to do to improve our value proposition. With those things in mind, we can then take a look at our pricing and we can say, okay, maybe there is an opportunity to raise prices if we enhance the value proposition by doing X, Y, Z. And then as we mentioned on innovation, it gives us a very nice roadmap, a very clear direction on what new product service concepts we might be able to develop based on actual customer demands. So to show how this all comes together in a real world example, I'm going to hand it back to Kay, who's going to walk us through one of her recent projects.
Thanks, Anthony. One of the things that we should probably step back for just a second to say is that when we do this kind of work on behalf of a target company for an acquirer, whether it's a strategic acquirer or whether it's a private equity group, we never mention that there's any transaction or any kind of deal pending. We go at these as a sponsored event, sponsored basically by the target company, who lets their customer base know that they have asked Strategex, not hired, but asked Strategex to perform a customer satisfaction and loyalty study on their behalf. One of the things that probably is most important in the work that we do is, as Anthony said, is not only important for the acquiring team, but most important it is for the management team. This adds as much value to their book of knowledge as it would be anything. And many times we find that even if if an acquirer has elected not to go forward with a deal, 9 times out of 10, they will leave the target company with our work post the event, in other words, post walking away, saying, look, if you can address these issues and basically solve some of the problems that have been identified by your customer base, we're more than willing to come back and look at a possible engagement again. So for an engagement from the standpoint of going forward with a deal. So again, never any mention of any kind of transaction. So that gives us the ability to be really very prescriptive third-party providers of information to the target company as well as to the acquiring team. So we're going to look at a real live case where they wanted to try to identify, one, the growth outlook, and two, what's the overall performance. So this would be a typical kind of VOC report that we do. There are roughly 6 chapters involved. Certainly, as Anthony mentioned, the Net Promoter Rating is a section. We find that it still has very strong legs in the business-to-business world, even though many of us, I'm sure, hang up on more than frequently on a sprint call or a robocall where they've asked you to rate on a scale of 0 to 10, how likely would you be to recommend. In the business-to-business world, it's still very strong, mainly because it's differentiated by, 1, how it's conducted, 2, importantly, the fact that it's not transaction-based, but in fact is driven by satisfaction and loyalty, and importantly to ask not only the top strengths and areas of improvement, but also to ask, importantly, why did you give them that particular rating? We also do, as we mentioned very early on, pretty in-depth competitor benchmarking along with key performance measures that holds taking care of the customer concept as well as future outlook. So this, again, these are excerpts from a study that was done, and we, of course, have kindly named them ACME, just as a sanitization role here. So what we see is one of the things that are generated are what we call the SWOT. Through the eyes of the customer, what are your strengths, weaknesses, areas of improvement? These are not things that we necessarily specifically ask customers as much as try to pull through from all of the commentary and all of the findings that we're looking at. Our researchers don't record the interviews, but they do take detailed notes, and out of those notes they're able to construct, in essence, a transcript. And those transcripts enable us to dig into the qualitative information and basically start to quantify it. So in this case, you can see Acme's strengths look like pretty good winners. Superior customer service, strong programs and lead quality, industry know-how, those types of things. So we also look at account management is not as proactive as they would want them to be. Leads are not as targeted. In this particular case, this is a company that was providing lead generations. Conversion rates were low. So what do we have from a threat standpoint? Some of the new competitors in the marketplace, of which there were many, it was starting to become a very saturated and very competitive field, had a better lead quality and oftentimes offered more innovative services than Acme did. We also found that there were transparency issues. In other words, they didn't quite share all of the reasons and all the ways that they were creating data. So in essence, because they didn't have that transparency, the companies, their customers felt that they weren't necessarily getting everything that they thought they would want to have. List scrubbing, good old-fashioned list scrubbing, certainly block and tackling, but it was a threat because others could do it better. But what we did find was that there were 3 really strong opportunities. Certainly one of those opportunities right smack dab in the middle is they wanted us to be a stronger marketer. Tell us what you're doing. Help us understand what's going on. Look into other industry segments. So again, this is something that gave both the target company as well as the acquiring team kind of a window into the future, things that they needed to address from a weakness standpoint, opportunities that were out there and available to them. And then looking forward, as Anthony mentioned, one of the first questions that are usually out of the gate is just that totally, basically a net neutral first question. What are the first things that come to mind? This is a good reading for us on being able to say, hey, 76% of the time, those first few phrases were all very positive. Now, we've seen the flip side on this, where we've seen a potential target company where you ended up with 25% negative commentary and maybe a 25% positive commentary and a whole bunch of right smack dab in the middle, 50% in the middle being pretty neutral, at which point you've got a long way to go. So first impressions for this particular company, led by some of the quotes that are beside it, is quality is what I think of. It's very quintessential. They're one of the few companies that can do what they do, obviously, certainly being able to help us separate this company from others. And then looking at their Net Promoter Score, this is a good, strong score. They ended up with, basically, we talked to 32 people, and they end up with a Net Promoter Score of 65%. Net promoters are taking basically the percent of people who are promoters, in this case 68%, subtracting those that are detractors, anybody that's giving them 6 or below, and that comes out with this wonderful score of 65%. You'll notice that we've got kind of a bulk of about a third of these folks sitting in the middle, what we call passive. The passive people are really those that are pretty loyal to you, but at the same point in time on a new project or a new opportunity, they may say, hey, I'll look at you along with somebody else. And so it becomes kind of a coin toss on who's going to get the new business. So from that standpoint, we always look at the passives and try to understand what can we do to help them understand our value proposition, understand what we provide more uniquely so that they become more of what we call the raving fan or the promoter. We're not trying to move the needle on the score. The score is strictly a benchmarking tool. It gives us a place to start. We are far more concerned about all of the other elements that go behind that score as we start to see as we go deeper into this short excerpted deck. So when we look at, for instance, scoring out top strengths and top areas of improvement, you can see that oftentimes, not unusual for us to hear that customer service related issues, in this case 64% of the time, were very positive, but we also had people telling us at the same point in time that they needed some improvement in it. That might relate to very specific elements of customer service. Return my emails faster, return my phone calls, let me know you're working on a problem. Certainly from that standpoint. But what we end up seeing is that, for instance, when we look at, in this case, the program value and the deliverables that the company offered, we see a good, strong score. Very little drag on that with a negative 23 versus 56%. So again, this helps us kind of point the way towards, do we have major issues or do we have things that we can just take advantage of and try to build upon? So very little drag across the board. Certainly can see that lead quality drag is a little bit more than the positiveness. So looking forward, this is one that we typically would do. These are the top, in essence, the top 5 accounts. And what I want to call your attention to is that top line. Top account, number 1, basically represents 14% of the revenue. Now look at the watch out. They gave them a net promoter score of 5. Their relationship is pretty secure, but their future spend is going to be down. And of course, one of the reasons why it's down is they call out specifically that it's lead quality. So in this case, you can see that net promoter scores may not necessarily, in some cases, gain you business. In essence, we have 5 top accounts where we've identified that their future spend of 2 of 5 is going to be down. An additional 2 are probably going to be flat or maybe slightly up. And only one of those top accounts, which right now accounts for only 6% of the revenue, is going to be up or perceives itself as being up. So again, this becomes kind of one of those watch out pages where we recognize right away that we've got to do some digging. What's the first thing that we would say to this particular account? Your number 1 account needs to the target, your number 1 account needs some attention. We need to try to understand what can we do, one, to make sure that the future spend is up, because clearly at 14% revenue, that's a pretty scary arrow going down to see that kind of decline. And we'll actually get into specifics. So here we looked at what were the kinds of complaints. Again, it's fairly typical, and you can start to see that, again, going through the first 13 accounts, you can see that those complaint areas go across a lot of different areas. So now we know that we have not only lead quality to deal with, but we can see a lot of check marks under account management. So that starts to point the way to, okay, we need more attention to how we are managing these accounts. So again, kind of a high-level view that we support with a lot of different commentary. I'm trying to only give you the most critical, I'll call them the critical bird's eye view pages to help you understand how this kind of work can contribute to commercial diligence. Very often we would not see this kind of reflection on complaint or issues in a commercial diligence report. When we look at competition, good news here from when we look at them compared to others in the digital lead generation category, 66% say they're much better. We see very little parity here. Only 22% say they're equal. And again, we can see some commentary relative to why they are excelling. When we look at a separate service category that they offer, which is in display solutions, you see a totally different kind of mix. You see only 44% saying they're better or slightly better than competition. We see 45% meaning a lot of parity. So what does that mean to us? It means we got to come up with ways to separate our display solutions away from everybody else's. We need to provide more value in the value proposition relative to what they're providing in this particular service vertical. So from our standpoint, looking at what do we need to be doing from this standpoint, we ultimately ask customers what do they need to do, and we'll find those deeper in the deck, which we of course haven't shared at this stage with this particular excerpt. So service performance, this gives it pretty clear. Looks at basically, guess what? You're not worse than anybody, but at the same point in time, on the lead gen side, you're quite much in the winning position. On the display solutions, you've got a lot of parity, so there's a lot of work to do from that standpoint. Performance, these are where we just basically look at some performance ratings. You score it out on a scale of 1 to 10. How would you rate them as far as their product offerings go? And you can see some nice green numbers. How well do you rate them as far as their ability to target an audience? Good, strong numbers. Where we start to see some trail-offs is the overall success of the program. Price for value, we see some, in essence, we see an 8.4 price for value. For us, in many cases, we would say you've got some price elasticity. You're providing a lot of value, and we're not seeing a lot of price tension. For us, price tension is somewhere in that range where we like to see a little bit of reddish in it. Somewhere from 7.7 to 7.8, 7.9, meaning you're right where you should be. In this case, we're thinking that this particular company is leaving a little bit of money on the table relative to what they are providing in value compared to what they are actually pricing their services out at. And then looking at care for the customer, we can see a lot of nice green numbers across the board. So we know, in essence, for the most part, they do a pretty good job on customer care and the customer experience overall. So one of the things that we see, certainly from this standpoint, this particular top account gave us some history. They now have fantastic leadership and fantastic salespeople. I look at how far they've come in delivering to our business and our needs. So this is a great kind of a feel-good slide for the acquirer, but it's an important slide for everybody to recognize, certainly the target company as well, that they have been doing a lot of things well, and they have made a lot of improvements. Now, are they as far along as they would ultimately want to be? If they were perfect, there wouldn't be any room for growth. If they were perfect, there wouldn't be any runway room for more opportunities for the next set of acquirers that are coming in, which of course is the acquiring team that was looking at, do we invest or not? So ultimately, when we look at future spend by top accounts, you can again see that in many cases, their category spend right now which is in that, basically that middle column, total spend in the category. For account 1, which is of course our problem child, 14% of our revenue is tied up with that particular account, gives us a bad net promoter score. Right now, their total spend in the category on account-based marketing is less than 10%. Their future spend in the category is going to be up, but their future spend with us in the category is going to be down. So this becomes a sheet to basically read to say, all right, where are we relative to future spend in the category, and how much of that might we have access to? For instance, in account number 4, we basically they're 6% of our revenue. Their total spend in the category is 25%. Their current spend with us is in the range of about 85 to 100%. So their future spend is going to be flat, pretty much, but their spend with us might be up a tad. So again, this gives you kind of a line of sight into future financials, future pro forma going forward. So ultimately what we do is we say, okay, step back from everything, and these are the top 4 things that we think you need to address once you close. Enhance the quality of the lead, looking at it through the eyes of the target company, and importantly through the investor's eyes. The growth strategy for them will hinge on quality assurance. Transparency, certainly looking at that. We need more R&D to identify ways to access the information from the investor standpoint. 3, develop predictive behavior. This is something that was seen deeper in the deck. Their innovation path obviously needed to get to the next phase of what clients want. And certainly for the investor, we said, determine whether you're going to do a buy or build strategy, because you've got to go into this area. It's become very critical from the standpoint of customers that that's an area where you need to go. And certainly from that standpoint, looking at basically, what are we going to do? Buy it or build it? So ultimately, one of the things that was said to us when we did our follow-on after the fact was this particular private equity client, basically have $700 million in assets under management, said to us, if we had followed only the commercial diligence recommendations, we probably would have gone down the wrong path. We could adjust based on, one, the expectations and plans that we had for the target based on the customer diligence. So in essence, they said, we used a balance of both. We found out what we needed to find from commercial, but had we only had commercial, that probably wouldn't have taken us where we needed to go. This gave us the ability to really look at what we have from a standpoint of the opportunities in the future. And it says, you know, we can invest confidently at this stage of the game in this particular target company because we've seen two different points of view, which blended give us a great line of sight on what we need to do going forward. So with that, we'll turn it back over to questions. And Anthony, I'm going to let you
we've been
got going on.
Been trying to answer a lot of these as we go, but there's some great questions, some great points being raised. A lot of them surrounding just the process. How do we go about doing this? So, Kay, I know you mentioned early on that this is absolutely done with the sponsorship of the seller. So generally, the way this works is once the LOI is signed, once the seller is comfortable giving up the customer list, that's where we get involved. We generally do these projects in a 3-phase process. Phase 1 is planning. So phase 1 is getting the objectives identified, developing a discussion guide, compiling the list of customer contact information, getting all those logistics set up. Phase 2 is the research itself. Phone interviews with the option for web surveys as well, but primarily phone interviews. These are very in-depth conversations that are predicated by the seller sending an email to the customers that we'll be calling on, saying, hey, we've hired this third party to conduct customer satisfaction research. Please take some time out of your day to participate. Be as open and candid as you can with your feedback, because the reason we're doing this is to understand how we can better serve you. By the way, once this process is over, we're going to follow up with you, tell you what we learned, tell you what we're going to do to address the issues you raised. So it positions this as a third party, it positions it as customer satisfaction, and it gives customers a mutually beneficial reason to participate, right? I'm going to give them 30 minutes so that they can hear what I have to say, come back and tell me what they're going to do to improve my customer experience, right? At no point, as Kay mentioned, do we disclose there's a deal. At no point do we disclose any other parties, including the acquirer. Once the seller sends that email, that's the green light for us to actually start scheduling the interviews. 1 to 2 weeks, depending on how many we want to do. You get a complete transcript of every conversation that we conduct. So near verbatim replay of the conversation, extremely powerful for sharing with account managers, whoever owns those relationships, so they can actually see what's coming from the hearts and minds of customers themselves. Once all the interviewing is complete, we go into phase 3, which is the analysis phase, where we aggregate all of the findings, prepare a management report. Pretty comprehensive document, because what we're doing is we're replaying a lot of that customer commentary. But what we always do is distill it into a 4 or 5 page summary. What are the key findings across accounts? What are the implications for the acquirer? What are the recommendations for the target post-close? We present it twice, once with the acquirer to talk about the results from the perspective of the deal and what the implications are there. And then post-close, we present again with the full management team. Same set of results, just changing the lens through which we're talking about them, focusing more on value creation and getting that playbook started.
And then importantly, clearly, as you might suspect, you'd say, well, wow, how long is this going to take? We normally are in about the last third of whatever exclusivity you have. So oftentimes we will find that we'll do this work in the last, probably about 2 weeks before close. Our work takes in general about 3 to 4 weeks to complete. So we back it up. We have to make sure that the target is comfortable, and vice versa, the acquirer is comfortable enough with the relationship and with the financials, that it starts to make sense to provide a customer list. Do we get every single customer on the list? No, absolutely not. Do we need to talk to every customer? No, absolutely not. We need to talk to enough of the most important customers to make sure the deal is a good deal, to make sure it's going to be stable. But importantly, we need to talk to those most important customers because they'll understand the target company better than almost anyone else.
Yep.
So from that standpoint, again, think through the best benefit of this is what goes to the management team after close, and that's clearly where we're focused.
Yeah. Another related question, if you're in an auction situation, can you still do this? That's a little tricky to do it as buy-side diligence because what we generally find is sellers aren't going to give up the customer list until there's exclusivity. If you think insights from customer diligence would be valuable going into auction, what we say is treat it more like the European model, treat it more like a sell-side engagement, where the sponsor does this on their own. They utilize a third party to conduct the customer diligence, gather the feedback, and then share the same set of results with everyone that's looking to make a bid, right? It puts everyone on a level playing field so that they don't have multiple people poking around their customer base.
And again, if you have a third party doing this, it tends to be a little more trusted from the standpoint of anybody that's in the auction, anybody that's doing the bidding tends to say, okay, you didn't go out and ask these questions yourself and only cherry pick the results that were the best results. We try to balance these sell-side diligence with, one, letting everybody know who is in the bidding situation, where there is room for growth, where there is room for improvement, because clearly when we go from one acquiring team to another acquiring team, as we might suspect we do in many cases, we want to make sure that there are opportunities for the next group in. Am I getting something that's concrete, or am I getting something that there's still growth opportunity?
Yeah.
Any other questions out there for us, Anthony?
Yeah, we're getting a fair amount of questions on pricing. We'll address those with everyone afterward. Again, each deal is a snowflake. We can't give a blanket statement on that. But Kay, there's one that you might be able to take. Do I need to talk to all customers, or do I need to talk to a subset of customers? What if I don't have customer concentration?
If you don't have customer concentration, then importantly, we'd probably take it and look at it analytically from channels. And do you have specific channels that you are heavier in versus another? Do you have regions, regional aspects where you are heavier than another? We want to try to understand if, for instance, if you have a heavy concentration of customers in the Northeast, but you've got some growing customers in the Southeast, we might want to take a look at the data in those two subsets. So again, not necessary to talk to everyone, and if you don't have customer concentration, congratulations. It puts you in a much better place, but at the same point in time, try to understand where your opportunities for growth really are, which is what we're really trying to understand and look at.
Yeah. Question is, you mentioned this is usually done in the last third. Is it really diligence, or is it really more confirmation? Well, I think there's both. I mean, going back to what I mentioned earlier, about 15-20% of the time, what we uncover has a meaningful impact on valuation. About, I don't know, one in 10 of the deals, the acquirer actually walks away based on what we uncover. So I would still absolutely consider it diligence. We're still mitigating risk. But again, a lot of the value is post-close, because we are uncovering a lot of insight that not only gives you the confidence to move forward, but lets you accelerate value creation, right? How can I retain accounts? How can I grow accounts? How can I get new accounts? How can I raise prices? How can I innovate? A lot of good, more forward-looking insights that we're uncovering along the way as well.
And there are a few instances where target companies may say, well, I only want you to talk to this smattering. And then once you close, clearly there have been enough issues that are there that you would want to say, let's go in after close and do a deeper dive on basically customer satisfaction and loyalty and growth opportunities. So not uncommon for us to take and do a preliminary view to make sure that the deal is going to be a good deal. As Anthony said, sometimes it will look good on paper, but once you hear through the advice of the customer what's going on, it gives you two opportunities. It gives you the opportunity as an acquirer to go to the team, the target team, to say, give us some of the background behind this particular relationship.
Yeah. This is a very astute question. It seems like there might be a risk if the report is shared with the target and the results are favorable. How do you prevent them from coming back and asking for more?
Oh, easy way. Very astute question, and that's one of the reasons why we will typically say to an acquirer, hold on to all of the transcripts unless there are some issues, and if there are issues, do not take a transcript, but just raise the issues with the target company to ask for more definition. We also encourage that you not share the report with the target company until after you have closed, because in fact, yes, in many cases, if it looks like everything is really rosy, the seller's team may come back and say, well, we want to look at the valuation again. We encourage that not be the case. This is, again, from the standpoint of most of the time, I would say probably 70% of the time, we are commissioned by the buy side, not the sell side. So our first interest is to protect the buyer in understanding what he or she is getting ready to acquire.
How long do these assignments typically last? I don't know. We say 3 to 4 weeks. It's really a function of the number of interviews you want to conduct. If this is a simple, not, a domestic business, not too complex, 20 interviews might be sufficient. We can probably do this in 2.5, 3 weeks. If it's, if we're looking at a global company, highly complex, multi-division, lots of different languages, it's more in that 3 to 4 week range. Let's see. Question, it sounds like there might be a lot of value in doing this with portfolio companies as well. Is there any experience on best practices with portfolios?
I would say across the board, what we have found is this is, as I mentioned early on, this is a baseline for both teams, both acquirer as well as management teams. So our best-in-class clients tend to use this throughout the life cycle of their hold. We tend to see that if they are monitoring the customer experience well and making improvements in how customers perceive their relationship going forward, that in essence, in many cases, we're able to reduce the hold time so that for all practical purposes, we can get RII much faster. So our best-in-class custom clients, yes, do use this for what we call life cycle, which is throughout the life of the portfolio company, recognizing that they have a baseline before they acquired it. This is a great gauge to try to determine, are your strategies working? And that's an important element to know for both sides of the table.
And as we hinted at earlier, sometimes this is done on the sell side. If you come in and set your baseline measurements during the buy side diligence, do this 1 or 2 times during the holding period, you basically have a really compelling sell side story to tell from a customer perspective that validates your financials, validates your SIM. So when you are putting something up for sale, you've already checked that box and you can accelerate the process. All right, we are right at time. Lots of questions we didn't get to. We'll certainly follow up with everyone individually that we didn't have time to address your questions. Strategex.com/checklist. If you go there, you can download an infographic of the 10 objectives and best practices that we outlined today. Contact information is on the screen. Feel free to reach out to either of us. Look forward to hearing from many of you, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Cassie, we'll send it back to you.
Yeah, thank you both. What a great presentation. And thank you everyone for joining us today for the webinar. As a reminder, the webinar was recorded and it will be posted on acg.org's website along with the slides by tomorrow morning. And all of you who attended and registered will get an email from us and it'll have a link to the slide and the presentation. So have a great day. Thanks.
Thank you all.